The pandemic changed the world overnight, and we all suddenly had to find new ways to work together. That was also true for the mining sector. I'm here with Froydis Cameron-Johansson, Group Head of International Government and Sustainability Relations, to explore Anglo American's journey. Froydis, welcome to the IGF AGM 2021.
Thanks, Mark. Great to be here.
So let's go back to early 2020 when COVID struck. Anglo American has a heavy footprint in countries that locked down overnight, like South Africa, Peru. What was the immediate impact on your operations?
Well, I think when I look back at when it all happened, I think for us as an organisation, as with many organisations, I think there was a sort of sense of, to be honest, confusion, disbelief, hesitancy, uncertainty. But guiding us through all of those sort of difficult moments was really about making sure that our employees, our contractors, and our communities were safe. And as things progressed, I think it became apparent that this wasn't going to be a 2-week thing or a 3-week thing or a 1-month thing. This was something that we really needed to put some proper plans and structure around. We also realized that the mine and the infrastructure that the mine supports was actually crucial to a number of communities around our operations. So if you shut down the mine, you were also potentially shutting off electricity, water, supply lines, all of which, of course, were of paramount importance to the communities in terms of managing through the health pandemic. So we then really had to evaluate, how do we approach this now from a much more sort of holistic perspective? So it's not about just shutting the operations down, but how are we thinking about the safety of our employees, not just the physical safety, but also the mental well-being? Of course, people under huge amounts of stress. We lost colleagues, as many people did. I mean, you're in the middle of a global health crisis. It's unbelievably stressful. And as the pandemic progressed, we engaged with governments, we engaged with our communities to really understand what the needs were so that we could support them in that very rounded approach.
Now, of course, priorities for government also shifted tremendously. How did that impact upon the way that you worked with governments?
I think a lot of governments' first reaction was to shut everything down. And that was right. In many instances, you had to just shut everything down. So there was no travel, supply lines were compromised, mines had to be closed. We absolutely recognize that. And this is what governments were, in many cases, wrestling with as well. How do they keep the economy going in a safe way? And so a lot of the conversations that we had were really about working with government to understand what their protocols were, what were they doing at a national and a regional level, and how did we then support them in what they were trying to do, but also having conversations which were very open and honest. And I think this goes to the level of trust that's been built up over the years of engaging proactively and constructively, is saying, well, actually, if we do shut these operations down, this is what can happen. So we had conversation, and of course, a conversation in the UK was different to the conversation in South Africa or in Peru, because in some of the countries, as I said before, the mines were actually that support infrastructure for communities. So if we shut our operations down, how are people going to get paid? How are they going to get the water and all of that other support? And the one thing we were very, very clear about right from the very beginning was no matter what happened, we would pay all of our workers. We would support them in the best way we can. We continued to contribute to pensions, to the healthcare service provider. And we did that throughout the pandemic for over 95,000 people. And that's something I'm really, really proud about, because that was always at the core of a lot of our decision making, which was always around people and how can we support the people on the ground.
Most of us tend to think of health as a core public sector responsibility. Did governments actively reach out to you as a mining company for help with the health crisis?
I think they were, yes, they did, because again, in somewhere like South Africa, Anglo American actually has quite a lot of infrastructure. So we have hospitals, of course, in the mine locations. We had set up testing labs to ensure that we could undertake testing with our employees as they were going into the operations. So there was never any question about not collaborating. And again, it was really about working with the health ministry and the local public health services to ensure that what we were doing was really working alongside what their overall plan was. And in some instances, in a number of these locations, the mines are pretty remote. And so actually, a lot of the health infrastructure that's available is really around those mine locations. And one of the big things that we did was, along with all the other interventions like water, electricity, supporting teachers and learners, was also the provision of PPE. So of course, if there's a mask mandate, what does mine, we had quite a lot of masks and PPE at the operations. So we were distributing those. We had hospital beds. We also had access to oxygen. And then, of course, it's the testing facilities. So again, it's ensuring that all the infrastructure that we had was going to help as many people as possible. So it was never the case of, well, this is ours, you can't use it. A lot of our infrastructure, we opened up to ensure that we could maximize the benefit of that infrastructure to as many people as we possibly could.
So in these fluid circumstances, how do you, again, as a mining company, maintain appropriate boundaries around where, how, whom do you support?
I think it was really, again, sort of working with our partners, so whether it was regional government, local government, or the community, to understand how we could help. And in some instances, we just couldn't. But it was how we could then provide access to other partnerships that could ensure that they were getting the right support. So, for example, on the We Care program, we worked with a number of other partners and brought them into the We Care program, who are much more specialized in their sort of areas. So mental health providers, support groups who are very experienced within the gender-based violence space, also community development groups who could really support on the community side. And I think it really was about ensuring that we were not sort of doing things that we really had no competency in, and being able to bring in those right partners. The other area that, of course, came really to the fore that we did a lot of work with the local teams was data protection. When people are testing, how is that data and the sensitivity around that data being managed? And the same is now playing out now, of course, in the vaccination space. How are people's medical data being treated? So, of course, we are now supporting the vaccination rollout in South Africa and in our other countries, but this is basically the support that we're giving is, of course, working with the local government and the local health service provider who are doing the vaccination programs. So it ensures that the data and the data privacy is very much protected, as would be right and appropriate. So there are all sorts of things that we never thought we would become expert in, that the pandemic has really kind of made us up our game to ensure that we can be that responsible business player to support our stakeholders.
Monitoring impact has become a mantra for the industry. Do you yet understand the full impact and the reach of support that you provided?
You're absolutely right. I think for us, I think the short answer is probably not, because in some cases we're still very much in it. But I can say with the We Care program, the way it's been received by our host communities, our employees, and the support that we've been able to give them, and also with our host governments, has been extraordinary. And I think just anecdotally, where we are today is in a very different place, of course, where we were even a year ago. And I think that full impact is probably not going to be realized for a while, from sort of the operations perspective, but from the health perspective, because again, different parts of the world are still going through different cycles in the pandemic. But I can say that when we have engaged with our workforce, so of course we do pulse surveys and we want to hear from our workforce, especially during these times, we've had an incredibly positive response. And they are really proud of what we've been able to achieve and the support that we've been able to give.
And presumably because you operate in environments where your workforce is such a large part of the community, positive internal engagement is in itself external engagement.
Absolutely. I mean, you can't sort of disassociate a number of our employees because they all live in the community, so they are one and the same. And I think that's why at the very beginning, our CEO was so adamant about making sure that we looked at this holistically. It wasn't about, okay, this is a mine, we need to shut it down and that's it. He was very, very opposed to making those decisions lightly. And he really wanted to make sure that if he was going to make that call, that he had listened and really understood what that would mean. And in many instances where some people initially wanted to shut down operations, we were able to keep some operations going with minimal staff. And then we were actually able to ensure that the We Care program was really instigated in those operations, which supported so many more people than just those who were working on the site.
COVID arguably accelerated the technology transition. I'm thinking both the prosaic, replacing travel with video conferences, etc., but also automation and robotics. What has your own experience been?
So look, there's been a huge sort of technological advances that we've put in from a COVID management perspective, and I think some of those will probably stay, which is a good thing. But we really do believe that technology has a huge part to play in mining's future. So for us, our sort of purposeful innovation program, which is really about sort of purposeful innovation and sustainability, called Future Smart, is all about that. So it's how are you harnessing technology to create a mine that has a footprint the size of a football field. It has very little freshwater abstraction. There's hardly any noise or dust. And of course, above all, it's safe. And then when you think about it in a pandemic, you wouldn't ever have had to shut down an automated mine because there would be no people in it. Now, that is not the case for us. But we do think that there is a real role that technology can play in the future for all of those reasons I mentioned. But of course, with any transition, we need to make sure that we do it in the right way and in a responsible way. So when we think about the transition and what technology can bring, we're really looking at it from a sort of future of work perspective and making sure we understand what are the skills that we're going to need in the future. What are the technologies that we're going to need, and how do we sort of make that transition? And we've already started having a number of conversations with unions, with government, because everybody knows that this is coming and this needs to happen. So how do we do this in a way that really puts people at the center of those decisions? And so for us at Anglo, the way we're approaching this is very much around listening. So again, really listening to understand how people feel about this, what their views are. You know, some people are worried, other people are incredibly excited. Technology is just this great thing for them and they want to really harness it and run with it. Other people are obviously a little more skeptical. We want to be transparent. So we want to make sure that as we go through this process, we're bringing people along on the journey and being open about these discussions. We need to collaborate. There is no possible way that any company can make this transition by themselves. So that's working with our employees, with the unions, with government. Everybody has a role to play in this transition. We need to make sure that we're investing in the future. So it's not all about let's invest in the latest tech kit. We need to be thinking about how we're investing in the skills for the future to operate that kit. How are we thinking about other skills that we're going to need? It's not just about technology in the future. We're going to be needing to really understand what are the other skills. So engagement with the community, engagement with other stakeholders. These are all really important skills that we need to have. And then, of course, everything for us in Anglo is really underpinned and driven by our purpose, which is to reimagine mining to improve people's lives. And so, again, people are at the heart of all of this. And so we need to make sure that throughout any of these discussions about the future and what it holds, we're really thinking about what this means to our employees and our surrounding communities and our host governments as well.
So to what extent are these measures likely to become permanent solutions?
I think it'll be a combination. I think there are definitely some that will be here to stay. I think Teams and not getting on a plane too much is here to stay. But I think travel will start up again as well. Maybe not to the great extent that we've had before. I think people will be more discerning, more cognizant of their climate footprint. And also, sometimes you need to be there. Sometimes you need to meet people. I know from my personal experience, we were able to have really good conversations with stakeholders because we had those relationships. But if we hadn't had those relationships from having spent time in person, it probably would have been a bit harder doing everything virtually. So I think there'll be a bit of a mix of these things, and I think the same will be true at the operations. But of course, there are other new technologies that are always evolving and always coming And I think it's really incumbent on the mining sector to be agile and open to those technologies, especially if they are going to ensure that the impacts of mining are much more minimized.
For many governments, the pandemic inflated public debt, triggering a need to tap new revenue sources. And yet miners have been reporting record profits. To what extent might this translate into pressure for greater tax contributions?
Look, I think it's every government's prerogative to have those conversations, and we actively engage in those conversations and want to have those conversations. For us at Anglo, we take a very proactive approach because we want to ensure that our contribution is done in the right way. I think in 2021, in the first half of 2021, we paid over $3.1 billion in tax and other contributions, which was sort of double from the year before. And so for us, we absolutely want to ensure that we are paying what we need to be paying. We want to have those conversations. We fully recognize that countries change, discussions change, and we want to be part of those discussions to support countries to ensure that they are developing their resources to the best of their ability. What we want to make sure, though, is that the tax and contribution that we're paying is also really ensuring that it's going to provide those benefits, and as well as ensuring that it's keeping those investment destinations competitive. So those are the discussions we want to be having with governments, because we think it's healthy, and those are things that we should be talking about.
To what extent are the competing time horizons a challenge? Government tends to think in political cycles, tends to think short term. Mining, more than most, is necessarily a multi-generational industry. How does that play out in these sorts of issues?
Absolutely. I mean, a week in politics is a very long time, as people say. And it takes probably 10 years to develop a mine, and that's quick. So for us, it's our approach at Anglo American has always been about building those relationships for the long term. So it's really incumbent on us as a company to really demonstrate the value that we bring to that country over the long term. So we really want these projects to be for the people of those countries. And how we engage around that, how we demonstrate those contributions, that's really what we need to be doing. So in somewhere like Peru, Quellaveco is very much a project for Peru, and we've always said that. So we're coming, hopefully, to completion of the project. COVID was challenging, but we were able to really keep going in great partnership with the community and the local government. But for us, it's about how do you ensure that people really feel that this is a project for Peru. And we've been through a lot of discussions. We've made a lot of commitments with the community, again, listening and really thinking through what they want and how we can support them. So it really is about ensuring that we don't get complacent as the mining industry, and really taking the challenge up to really make people understand our timelines, but also feel the benefits. We can talk a good game, but if they don't feel the benefits that we bring, then that's on us.
So let's look to the future. With time, many threats can be reframed as opportunities. What lessons will you take with you about collaborating with partners?
So lessons, I think, is, we always knew it, but it's kind of been ingrained now, is the importance of partnership. So I think if there was any company that thought they could navigate their way through COVID on their own, I hope they're rethinking that, because nobody can do this by themselves. For us as Anglo, I think the partnership approach was strong, and now it's really strong. Say it's kind of been bolted down to the floor in terms of approach. So I think the partnership piece is definitely strong. I think the other big lesson is thinking through the timeframes. So again, I think everybody thought this would be over very quickly, but it wasn't. We're still going through it. So thinking through how do you manage your teams, the potential for fatigue, and making sure that we're really supporting our teams. And then I think it's really around the leadership approach. That again, we had our purpose, but again, I think throughout the pandemic, the company and everybody across the organization really lived the purpose. because it was around how are we supporting our workforce, how are we putting them first, how are we making sure that they're safe, and really bringing to life the values and the purpose. And then I think there was also, again, the sort of working from home switch that just happened overnight for people in more office-based environments, and how that just happened. I mean, I'm so impressed at how seamlessly it all took place. And I think that will also change again. So I think in terms of people seeing the mining sector as, a bit more agile, very tech innovative, and being able to be very flexible about where you're working, I think that's definitely going to be staying with us. And then a personal reflection is having had to participate in homeschooling, as I know so many people had to do, I think I would have brushed up on my times table and my English grammar.
I sympathise a lot. I tend to think of mining as a solutions-based industry, but really what resonates with me through our discussion today is the space that you've made to listen. That not all the solutions are in-house. You can do many innovative things, and just as valuable, arguably, in these times is taking the time to listen to your partners in order to really understand their circumstances and their needs and their desires.
Absolutely, and I think the listening part to your partners was paramount. And again, that's something that we did before, and now I think there's a real sort of super appreciation that that we need to do that. Mining companies often have a lot of technical people, a lot of engineers. It's a problem. Here's a hammer. I can solve it. As opposed to, okay, let me understand the problem more. I don't need to have an answer right now. Let me find out some more information from other people. They can educate me. I can learn from them. And then let's solve that problem together. So I think you're right. There's been a big sort of switch in, I know you have a problem, here's how I'm going to solve it for you, to, okay, we have a challenge. Let's understand everybody's perspective. How can we solve this together to move forward to a much better space where we can all thrive and all prosper?
Froydis, one more question to close. Do you think the pandemic has made us better prepared for the other big challenges we face as a society? I'm thinking climate change, inequality, the energy transition, etc.
I really hope so. I really hope one of the big positive things we take away from the last 18 months, 2 years, is that anything can happen at any time. And we need to be prepared, and we need to be able to put our best foot forward together to solve these problems. And I think from a climate perspective, we're about to have the COP meeting. And it's really, I think, shown where governments divide when they come to solve a problem, but also where they can come together. And so I really hope that the lessons that we as a globally can learn is for something as big as climate change, we all need to come together and we need to be pulling in the same direction. There is no room for nationalistic agendas and sort of pointing fingers. We all need to really pull together so we can move forward in the right way.
Now, I suspect I know the answer to this one already, but would you describe yourself as fundamentally optimistic or cautious about the future?
I think I'm cautiously optimistic, let's put it that way. So having been in the heart of how we have had to navigate through this, I've seen the good, the bad, the ugly, and the downright inspiring. So I really want to sort of harness that. And I think there is so much opportunity for us to be able to make big differences, that gives me a huge sense of optimism. But again, the kind of cautiousness comes in because I also know how big these challenges are and what it takes. But that, of course, is not a reason not to do something, or at least not to try.
Froydis, look, let me thank you for your time today. It's been a pleasure to hear Anglo American's experience, and we really appreciate your openness and sharing through this journey.
Thanks very much. Pleasure.